Welcome to the Essential GM. Today, I'm talking through my thought process on Chapter 7 of Call of the Netherdeep, including our big boss fight and concluding the campaign and what do we do next. So the Heart of Despair is this enormous, surreal arena. There's water all over, but we're automatically given water walk to all of our PCs. There's these shrines to the different deities and this statue of Alyxian. It's just a very enormous and surreal place to have our final battle. It looks pretty cool. And after that, Alyxian's gonna ask the big question. Am I free to go? There's 3 possible outcomes. The players will unanimously decide to let him go, fight him to the death, or they will sort of figure out a way to redeem him in this fight. This question is really the crux of the whole module, and we've painted this picture of who he is, and it's up to them to figure this out and decide, and we want to put that power into their hands. I think the bad ending could be cool, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. There are a couple of safeguards built in to at least make the players informed of what they're doing. They have to unanimously agree, and if they unanimously agree, Alyxian doesn't even believe it himself, and he'll ask them a second time. And then if they take too long discussing it, he's gonna get impatient and kind of irritable, and that's gonna be kind of a tip. The important thing here is the player choice. If I feel like they're not aware of the choice they're making, then I will do stuff to kind of up the ante on that, make sure that they know the choice that they're making. If they decide to make it, that's fine. But obviously, if Alyxian looks like he's gonna get his way and be freed, he's gonna be pretty nice to everybody. Now, the book does talk about the rivals possibly chasing you in. This is one thing I might try to avoid a little bit. I don't necessarily want the players going into this fight drained of all their spells and halfway knocked out. This is our big epic fight at the end, so I'm gonna try to keep that, before we enter here, so that they can come in good health. If they look like they're gonna jump in, try to telegraph that this place looks dangerous or ominous if they do end up chasing you in, because sometimes, even with our intervention, things happen that we can't control or don't expect. I will probably have Alyxian wait to ask the question, wait to speak till the rivals resolve their thing. You even could give them a chance to have a rest in here, potentially, if they're really beat up from that battle. Alyxian could fudge things and give them a chance to rest or think on it overnight, even though we know he's supposed to be impatient. There are ways that you can adjust and audible in the moment. So one thing that I try to do in any battle, even if it's just a goblin or a kobold, is to bring it to life and remember that these monsters, these enemies, these bosses aren't just here to be a foil to the players. They have their own motivations and actions and things like that. So I do want to make sure every round that Alyxian speaks and says something, that he's thinking, that he's talking, that he's interacting. There is a lot of pre-scripted stuff in the book for each form and before and after, and if they ask him questions, so that should help you fill that out. Now, in the last chapter, how many times we placated Alyxian determines how many times we get an advantage on charisma checks. I'm not a big fan of straight up telling players the exact mechanic and the meta of this. The book basically suggests that you would just flat out tell them, at least the way that I'm reading it. First time they do a charisma check, I will actually tell them to roll an advantage and just say, you are feeling a strong connection to Alyxian. Now, what you could do is you could tell them the number, that's sort of a halfway in between where they have some knowledge. And then after the session, after we've explained this, that's when I'll want to tell them the actual mechanic of how it worked and how their actions in the Netherdeep placating Alyxian mattered here. I don't know that I necessarily want them to know all of the mechanics of because you placated Alyxian 5 times, you will get advantage on 5 charisma checks. I want them in the story, invested. I want them thinking like the characters and being the characters, not being in the meta as much. You could go all the way and not tell them anything, just be like, you have an advantage, now it's gone, you don't feel as connected anymore, and tell them all of that later. That's just one approach. So Alyxian has at least 3 forms that we'll see here, possibly a 4th. Each one gets a little bit more human, a little bit more redeemed. If you like doing voices for NPCs, you might shift his voice around from something really monstrous. Just having that voice change will help sell that he's becoming more human, in addition to the visuals that we're portraying and the artwork and all of those things. All right, so let's talk combat. First, outside of his 3 stat blocks, he has lair actions that he may have for most of the battle unless the players sort of eliminate each shrine and his ability to do that. That happens on initiative count 20. So you want to put something secret from the players on the tracker so that you keep track of that and don't miss those, because those are important, as well as his legendary actions. Now those don't necessarily happen at the same point on the initiative counter, but just to give yourself some kind of reminder to be taking them, because you don't want to miss those. Those are going to be important in this battle to make it really strong and epic, especially if you're going against 5 players, which this is balanced for. I think a big overall thing with the battle is because we have 3 forms, because he has a lot of different moves, each one has its own legendary actions, we want to mix it up and try to showcase as many of these different abilities as possible so he seems hard to predict and they don't know what's coming next or what he's going to pull out to make this feel really threatening. Alyxian also has legendary resistance twice per day. It's in the stat block for each of the forms, so my interpretation is that each form gets to do it twice. But depending on your battle and the number of players that you have, you may want to shift things around. In fact, I know there are some of you out there that are playing with 3 PCs or less, and this is balanced for 5 players. So especially if you have 3 or less, you might want to shift things around. Maybe you take less lair actions. Maybe it's every other round. Maybe he has less legendary action points, so he can only do one thing per round or something like that, because D&D is a very action economy based game, and taking away or reducing some of those legendary actions and lair actions will help balance this for having less players, because your players will have less turns. So our first form here is Alyxian the Tormented. He's this huge, disgusting monster. A way that you could come out that could be really interesting is, you do the lair action that can restrain one of the party members. You can do a multi-attack with Grasping Hand. So you can get a bunch of party members restrained pretty quickly, potentially. And I think that could be a good way to encourage people to talk, roleplay, and do charisma checks if you want. It's also just a fun annoyance to throw at your players and to make it seem threatening if he has multiple ways to restrain several targets. His legendary action is Weapons of Yore, so that's kind of a cool visual that can do some damage. He also has this Void Eyes attack that's rechargeable, so I think when he has it queued up, when he gets the recharge, he's probably going to use it. Our second form is Alyxian the Callous. He's looking a little bit more human, celestial. We're certainly taking that arc in that direction. He has a once per day attack called Heavenly Destruction. I'm planning to pull this out right away. The players don't know he can only do it once a day, so I think it can strike some fear without it actually killing them. You could also try to time Heavenly Destruction so it's sort of the last thing that he does, but that can be really unpredictable and you don't know what the players are going to throw out. If you liked restraining the characters in the last round, Alyxian does have Celestial Chains as one of his legendary actions, so you have another mechanic that will do that. If you want to dish out damage, he has Flare and Attack as other options for legendary actions. You can also mix it up. Variety is good, keeping the players on their toes and not knowing what's coming next. I like that he can use Blinding Teleport as part of his multi-attack. That paired with an actual attack, I think is just a good wrench to throw into everything. And now for our third form, we have Alyxian the Dispossessed. He is a frail old man, and his sort of more fragile looking version of himself that's not a monster might be having your party think more about redemption and thinking about that option that will get them to the good ending. They don't have to go there. You don't have to press them there. Just present the visuals and they'll make the choice. Now, in terms of his damage output, she's a little weaker, but he still is pretty threatening. Now, your party has had 2 to 3 encounters with 1 or more Death's Embraces. When you do those fights, keep an eye on how they react and deal with the Petrify, because Stoneheart Dagger has that same ability. That is something that Alyxian quite literally can throw at your party and then also immediately get the dagger back with his bonus action. As a legendary action, he can also create a Ruidium Shard, which has a huge radius of 120 feet. And if people are missing saving throws, they could be advancing levels of Ruidium Corruption and Exhaustion, which can be pretty deadly and can also really reduce what they can do in this battle. It could hinder their movement quite a bit. It depends on how far along they are. That is something that might also force them into trying to talk their way out of the situation. Now, at this point, we either reduce the HP to 0 and kill Alyxian the Dispossessed to get the neutral ending, or 3 successful charisma checks will fully redeem him. And he has a lot of pre-scripted dialogue to help hint that this is really helping every time they have a successful charisma check. This is a really lengthy battle that might take the whole session. So as you're about to get to it, You might look at the clock. There are some spots that are pretty decent for cliffhangers. Right before this, what's inside the Heart of Despair. Once that first form is defeated and a second form rises, that would be a cool spot for a cliffhanger. Hey, we're not done yet. We got to think about this for a week or 2 weeks. I don't think the second to third form is a good cliffhanger because of his appearance, unless you have him do something really cool in like one action before you end. But I think a better place would be after that third form when you are having to escape. Now, no matter what they do in terms of the ending or redeeming Alyxian or letting him free, they will have to escape the Netherdeep. And escaping the Netherdeep is another spot that could be a really good cliffhanger. So what about player death? Maybe you haven't had any in this campaign yet. Maybe you've never killed a player. Maybe you do it all the time. There's different philosophies about this, but I think there's one thing that a lot of people will generally agree on is that a final battle like this, especially if you're concluding a module, even if you continue on or ending the campaign, this is a pretty good spot for a player death, particularly if they survive most of the battle. And there's no trying to shoehorn in a new character next week and figure out how that all fits into everything. And this is one of the best times to not hold back and kill a player. That doesn't mean you should be out for blood and try to kill them, but this is one of the better spots for that to happen, and I think this is the time for you to let the rolls go as they may and take the kid gloves off. If they die, they die. Let's talk about the 3 endings. I think they're all actually really solid. The bad ending seems like it's unlikely that they would get it, but even if they do, or if he maybe escapes because he defeats them, I think that's an interesting premise. It just means you have to write and build some of your own content because Alyxian is now freed on the world. There's consequences. He's doing harm to ank'harel and the rest of the world, and they need to go fix this. I think that's a really cool premise. The neutral ending has a not so satisfying vision for them, and the good ending, obviously, you've redeemed Alyxian and you get to see Alyxian the Absolved. He's part of your escape. He actually, especially if your party is weakened and beat up, you could put some things in their way for him to really show off and to help them as a return of the favor for redeeming him. So what's next? Well, we could end the campaign or we could continue it. If you're ending the campaign, especially if you have that cliffhanger of escaping the Netherdeep or something like that, use the time in between to talk to your players one-on-one about what they see their character doing, and you can maybe try to kind of shape an epilogue. Maybe it's not just what happens immediately next, but where are these characters in 6 months or a year or something like that? I did that with my last campaign where they sort of killed the big bad and that was the end of a session, and then the next session we had very few rolls and we just kind of wrapped it up, and that was one of my favorite sessions that I've ever had. It was fantastic. Maybe you want to keep going with these characters and continue the campaign and not wrap it up though. That is what I intend to do because I have ideas for things that tie to player backstories that I think just with how much of a sort of linear path this module is that aren't going to all get fit in, but I won't know till I'm close. And I think that's important. You can have all these plans right now, but you gotta be ready to shift stuff with tabletop RPGs. You should first talk to your players and see how are they feeling. Do they love the characters? Are they getting tired? They wanna play a new class? How are you feeling? Do you need a break from DMing? These are all important things to consider. The one other piece of advice that I have with that is to not start these conversations too early. Getting excited for the next thing can really lose the steam and momentum of the thing that you're doing. Do it when you're in the Netherdeep. Do it when you're almost there if you think that might be a possibility. And the thing is, you've made it this far. You've DM'd this module. I'm sure there were things that went outside of my advice, outside the book, and you've handled them. So just communicate with your players, trust your feelings on this one, and keep rolling and have fun.